Welcome to Reno Murders, Death in the Biggest Little City. I'm Becca. So let's talk about Jered Stefansky, or Jered. Jered with an E, Jered with an A. Depends on which police report you're looking at. He was 26, from Redding, California. A kid who probably should have been living the young adult life. Jobs that suck, cheap beer, maybe figuring out what to do with the rest of his 20s. Kid who probably should have been living the young adult life. Jobs that suck, cheap beer, maybe figuring out what to do with the rest of his 20s. But instead was dabbling in something a little bigger. Marijuana, cash, the kind of transactions where people say, don't worry, it's safe, right before it very much is not safe. Now, Jered wasn't Pablo Escobar. He wasn't running a cartel. From what we know, he was more like the courier, the middleman, the guy trusted to show up, pick up the money, and keep the wheels turning. His mom, Sheila, has said as much. He was connected into a marijuana network, bouncing between Northern California and Nevada. And on June 19th, 2020, Jered made a decision that would end his story. That morning, he left Redding in a rental car. Why a rental? Maybe he didn't want his own plates on the road. Maybe it was just practicality. He was headed for Mound House, Nevada, a dusty little spot east of Carson City that is better known for brothels and warehouses than for any vacation plans. His mission, to pick up a large amount of cash tied to a marijuana deal. Some reports throw out the number around $400,000. That's the kind of money you don't just Venmo. You drive in person and hope the people you're meeting are as honest as they say they are. By all accounts, Jered made it to Mound House. He was supposed to meet on Martin Drive, an unremarkable street in an unremarkable neighborhood that suddenly became the center of a multi-state murder-for-hire conspiracy. His last known phone call, not to his mom, not to his friend, to a number linked directly to a man named Cory Spurlock, the man who would later be convicted of a murder-for-hire, stalking, and running a marijuana empire. That's the breadcrumb investigators would cling to later. And then silence. Jered never came back, never made it home, no more texts, no more check-ins, just a black hole where a person used to be. His family realized something was wrong fast, reported him missing to Redding PD on June 21st. 2 days later, they knew Jered had a routine. He wasn't the type to just disappear off the map, but he had disappeared completely. That's the story of the day Jered Stefansky went missing, a 26-year-old from Redding who drove to Nevada chasing a marijuana deal and instead drove right into the shadows. So you might be thinking, like I was when I was researching the story, wait, weed. Isn't weed legal now? Why would anyone risk their life in some dusty backlot deal? Here's the answer. Taxes, greed, and the good old American hustle. The dispensary charges $60. Your guy charges $40. And suddenly, the black market still has a customer base. And let's not forget, moving pounds of marijuana from California into Nevada is still technically trafficking. The feds don't care that it's legal where you live. If you cross state lines, congratulations. You're an interstate drug dealer. It's cheaper, it's faster, and in Jered's case, it was deadly. So let's fast forward a few months after Jered disappears. Summer turns into fall, and now we're in October. By this point, Jered's mother has started talking. She's gone on podcasts, she's doing interviews, publicly begging for answers just like any mother would. And apparently that chatter was more than Cory Spurlock could handle. In Cory's paranoid little mind, he decided that Will Larsen, one of his associates, must have been a rat, an informant, a snitch. You know, the classic mob movie conclusion when someone feels the walls closing in. Never mind that no one had proven anything. Never mind that paranoia is a terrible business model. He zeroed in on Will and his wife, Yesenia, and then decided they had to go. So he did what paranoid drug dealers do. He started stalking them, For weeks, Cory and his wife shadowed the Larsens through Reno and Carson City. Picture that. You're running errands, maybe hitting a grocery store, maybe driving down Carson Street, and there's a crew following you, taking notes, planning your death. That was Will and Yesenia's October. Investigators later pieced together just how deliberate it was. This wasn't some hot-headed, spur-of-the-moment thing. This was tracked, surveilled, and watched. Every moment was actually being logged. And for Cory, it wasn't just about survival, it was about control. He couldn't let the story of Jered, the missing guy from Redding, whose mom wouldn't shut up, spiral into a full-blown liability. So instead of cutting ties or running or maybe just getting out of the game, he doubles down on violence. He decides that the Larsens are the weak link. And in his world, weak links didn't get to live. By the time November comes, his stalking has escalated. Larsens were being followed beyond Reno and Carson City. And on November 8th, 2020, it all comes to a bloody and brutal end. Will and Yesenia were driving south on Highway 395, just outside Bridgeport, California. For anyone who hasn't been, that stretch of 395 is beautiful but isolated. Winding roads, high desert valleys, Sierra peaks in the distance. It's the kind of place you'd stop for a roadside photo or, in this case, to be murdered. Cory and a co-conspirator or co-conspirator, this has never been disclosed, followed them out of Reno and Carson City, tailing them across state lines. Hours of surveillance was about to end in violence. Somewhere just beyond Bridgeport, they pounced. The Larsens were shot and then stabbed, left on the shoulder of the highway like garbage. No dignity, no attempt to disguise what had happened. Their bodies were dumped beside the road. A calling card of brutality, meant to send a message as much as to silence them. Think about that. A husband and wife executed in broad daylight on one of the most iconic highways in the West. US 395 runs from the Mojave Desert up through Reno and beyond. It's a lifeline road, and there in the middle of nowhere, the Larsens' lives. And because Cory was paranoid enough to believe a podcast was outing his operation, investigators would later confirm the grisly details. Both victims were shot and stabbed. This wasn't quick, it wasn't clean, it was rage and cruelty. And if you're wondering if Cory spared a thought for Yesenia, the wife, the answer's no. She was collateral damage, in his opinion. Wrong place, wrong time, wrong husband. Just to twist the knife a little further, it is said in the court documents that Cory robbed Will Larsen's wallet, taking cash straight off of his dead body. And so clearly this wasn't about the money. It was about dominance, about proving he could strip the victim of everything, even in death. For weeks after, Highway 395 carried not just traffic, but that dark memory. 2 bodies on the roadside, a double murder that tied together Nevada's drug underworld with California's quiet mountain roads. And for investigators, it was a turning point because now they weren't looking at a missing man anymore. They were looking at a pattern. Jered was missing. The Larsens were executed. All roads were leading back to one man, Cory Spurlock. For almost a year, Jered was just gone. His family searched, called, begged for answers. Redding police had him listed as a missing person, but missing doesn't get you very far, especially in Redding, California, because they've got a serious problem with missing people. And of course, there were whispers, there was speculation. Maybe he skipped town for the money. Maybe he was hiding. Maybe he was buried somewhere nobody would ever find. But that all changed in March of 2021. Set of skeletal remains were found at the Rye Patch Recreation Area out in Pershing County, Nevada. For anyone who has not been there, imagine a barren stretch of nothing, broken only by a reservoir and the occasional camper. It's the kind of place you drive past on I-80, you glance at, and you immediately forget. But for Jered, it had become his grave. The body was a shallow grave, not carefully hidden, not professionally disposed of, more like someone hoped the desert itself would just finish the job. The wind and weather and time pulled that dirt back, and hikers or hunters, it is not disclosed which, came across those bones, and suddenly the story that had been all speculation became horrifyingly real. DNA testing by the Washoe County Medical Examiner confirmed what his family already feared. The remains belonged to Jered. After 9 months of silence, Jered was no longer missing. He, too, was murdered just like the Larsens. So think about that timeline. He disappears in June 2020, reported missing 2 days later, and by March 2021, he's found in the middle of nowhere. That's not an accident. That's a message. And here's the big point. Jered's discovery wasn't the end of this story. It was the match that lit the fuse, because once police had a body, they started connecting all those dots. The phone records, the drug trafficking networks, names like Will and Yesenia Larsen, and ultimately Cory Spurlock. Jered's shallow grave wasn't just evidence of a murder. It was evidence of a whole conspiracy unraveling. So who the hell is Cory Spurlock, the guy pulling the strings in this whole bloody saga? On paper, he's a 36-year-old from Missoula, Montana. Not exactly Scarface territory, but in reality, Cory was running what you might call a marijuana empire out of Mound House, Nevada. That's right, Mound House. The same little community outside Carson City, better known for legal brothels and cheap warehouses than criminal masterminds. If Reno is the big little city, then Mound House is the sketchy cousin that doesn't get invited to Thanksgiving. Spurlock's operation wasn't small time, though. We're talking 1,000 kilos of marijuana moving through his network. That's not a couple of dime bags under the mattress. That's industrial level trafficking. Millions of dollars changing hands. He had the setup, the contacts, and enough paranoia to sink the Titanic. And paranoia is the key word here. Cory wasn't just selling weed, he was living in fear of being exposed. Every phone call, every whisper, every podcast mentioning his name turned into a potential death sentence in his mind, which is ironic because he was the one handing out the death sentences. The feds later said Cory got spooked when Jered's mom went public about her son's disappearance. She did do interviews and even a podcast. And in Cory's head, that was proof. Someone in his crew had flipped. He looked at Will Larsen, called him a rat, and decided the only way to fix that problem was to erase Will entirely. Also his wife. This is where Cory's character really comes through. Instead of cutting ties or, maybe quitting crime altogether, he just doubles down. He put money on the table, a classic murder for hire setup. By 2023, the murders of Jered and the Larsens weren't cold cases anymore. The feds had been working quietly. They had been tracing the phone records, they had been pulling financials and lining up these witnesses and building something airtight. And on May 16th, 2023, hammer dropped. That day, a federal grand jury returned an indictment charging Cory with murder for hire conspiracy, specifically tied to the killing of Will Larsen and conspiracy to distribute marijuana. No bail, no freedom. He wasn't going anywhere while the government built the rest of its case. The indictment was just the start. From there, the lawyers went to war. Motions, delays, evidence, hearings, the kind of behind-the-scenes legal maneuvering that stretches a case out for years, which explains the next big date. The original trial date was set for April in 2025. In U.S. District Court. That was supposed to be the showdown, Cory versus the Department of Justice, while all the evidence lay bare. But like a lot of high-profile cases, it didn't go off as planned. Defense lawyers argued over admissibility, prosecutors kept stacking new charges, and the schedule shifted. And then came September 12th of 2025, not that long ago, the day the jury finally spoke. After weeks of testimony and years of buildup, they did find Cory Spurlock guilty on almost every major count. Guilty of conspiracy to distribute more than 1,000 kilos of marijuana, guilty of murder for hire conspiracy, guilty for tampering with witnesses by killing, guilty of interference with commerce by robbery, guilty of causing death with a firearm during a crime of violence, and guilty 2 counts of stalking resulting in death. That's not just guilty. That's a legal sledgehammer. The DOJ press release read like a laundry list of everything Spurlock had ever done wrong. He didn't just lose, he lost spectacularly. And now the final chapter is looming. On December 16th, 2025, Cory will stand in front of a judge for sentencing. The maximum penalty is life in prison. No parole, no second act, no redemption arc, just the rest of his days behind bars. So why kill Jered in the first place? Simple. Money, paranoia. He left Redding to pick up almost $500,000 in cash, and his last call was to Cory's number. That's not a coincidence. That's a setup. Either Jered was robbed for money, silenced for what he knew, or most likely both. Cory didn't trust him, didn't need him alive, and figured the desert would do the cleanup. It was the same playbook he used again with the Larsens. If Cory thought you were a risk, you didn't get to walk away. In his world, loyalty was everything and suspicion was a death sentence. Okay, so we do know that Cory wasn't out there all by himself, lurking around Reno with a shovel and a paranoia problem. He had help. Every villain has a crew, and this one's no different. Enter Orit Ogid. I think I'm pronouncing that right. It's a very unique name, Swedish or something. It's Spurlock's wife. Not exactly the supportive spouse role you'd hope for. In March 2021, she was arrested right alongside him. And get this, she eventually pled guilty to stalking, resulting in death. That means she wasn't just a bystander. She was part of the group following the Larsens around Reno and Carson City, watching their every move, helping set them up for an ambush. Imagine that. Date night spent planning double murders. So here's the lineup. You have Cory, the paranoid mastermind. You have his wife, Orit, riding shotgun on the surveillance game and eventually pleading guilty. Then you also have the Larsens. They were once co-conspirators themselves from how the investigation reads until they got branded as rats, and then they ended up silenced forever. And when you lay it all out, it shows exactly how far paranoia can spread, from a missing man in Redding to stalking through Reno to a bloody double murder on a highway. Now, here's where the case gets downright surreal. Jered's mom did what any desperate parent would do. She went public. She went on a podcast about missing people and told the story of her son. She even said the names of the people she thought might know something. And one of those names was Will Larsen. So think about that. A podcast interview, the kind of thing I'm doing right now, became the spark for a double homicide. That's how fragile Cory's empire really was. For Jered's family and for the family of Will and Yesenia, it's not just justice in the sense of bringing their loved ones back, but it's closure, a recognition that their deaths matter, that someone is being held accountable. And for the rest of us, it's a reminder that paranoia, greed, and violence can turn even a weed business in Mound House into a bloody saga that spans states, ends lives, and ties up the courtroom for years. This has been Reno Murder. Thank you for watching or listening. If you liked it, like it. If you want to follow it. And if you want to share it, share it. I hope you do all of the above.